One of the weird things that happened to me after the Blackwater book came out is I started getting invitations to go to Washington to meet with Congress people, I had never even been to the Capitol on like a tour. I think I was arrested there a couple of times, but I'd never actually been inside of the Capitol, and I ended up testifying in front of the Defense Authorization Committee this past May, and I was invited by Representative Jim Moran of Virginia, and it was a sort of last-minute thing, and he invited me to give testimony on the role of private security forces, or private contractors as they call them. Mercenaries is the accurate term. And so I went to Washington. I'd been in Colorado, and I flew back to Washington, D.C., and I was in a hotel. I didn't even own a suit at the time. And irony of all ironies, Naomi Klein took me out and bought me a suit that day. There was no logo on it. And so Naomi and I were sitting in the hotel room the night before I was set to testify. She had been in D.C., and then when we found out I was going to testify, she said that she was going to stay over to be with me for the hearing. And so we go there, and she takes me to buy a suit, and then we got it tailored somewhere in Chinatown so that it didn't look like I was drowning in a tarp or something, because they didn't have my size, and they were surprised they didn't know my size, my suit size. And so we're sitting there, and the staffers on the Defense Authorization Committee had been calling repeatedly to make sure that I was going to be okay, testifying, and that I wasn't going to do something too crazy. And then we get a call of a different sort. Very late in the evening, and it was one of the senior staffers on the Defense Authorization Committee, and he said, before I tell you what I'm going to tell you, I want to say you're still testifying tomorrow. So I thought, this will be interesting. Turns out that 10 of the leading war contractors in this country were pressuring the committee not to have me testify. And they were pressing the committee to disinvite me. And the Republicans were working behind the scenes trying to pull some procedural maneuvers, saying that it's very rare to have a non-military or government official testify in front of this committee. And to his credit, Jim Moran stood up to them and said, no. But you're sitting in this hotel room, 10 mercenary outfits are saying they don't want you to testify. It was a bit like a little John Grisham book or something. And so anyway, we go the next morning. And it was me and Naomi and Representative Jan Schakowsky, who has been really great on this issue in a lot of ways, of Illinois. I'm not to say she's been great on every issue, but on this specific issue, she's been one of the few people in the Congress that actually gets it. So it was me, Naomi, a representative of Iraq Veterans Against the War, Jeff Millard, came to the hearing, and we're on one side of the room, and then on the other side of the room were about 25 lobbyists for the industry. And the Republicans boycotted the hearing with the exception of one lone nut job, Representative Jack Kingston of Georgia, the single, and I know what I mean when I say this, the single most conservative member of the Congress. He has like a 1,000% voting record with Ralph Reed's Christian Coalition and all of those guys. So we did this hearing, and I really felt, in my naivete and my lack of experience in Washington, that this was going to lead somewhere. And I had met with a number of Democrats down there, and I was talking about them writing legislation. The only legislation that should be written on this issue is simple: ban mercenary activity, ban mercenary funding. So then a few weeks later, I get a phone call, and I'm going to be a little Washington here and not name this individual right now, but I get a phone call from the office of one of the top Democrats in the Congress. I'm not going to say which house, but let's just say this is an extraordinarily powerful individual right now. And they wanted me to come down and meet with them, and they were being sort of secretive about what the meeting was going to be about. I stupidly thought we were going to talk about the mercenary issue and how to stop mercenary funding and mercenary activity. So I get to the office of this leading Democrat, and he says to me, yes, we're meeting here in the Congress, in my office, but this is an off-the-record meeting. And I thought that was a little bit odd. And it turns out he wasn't really interested in talking about legislation. He wasn't interested in talking about any of the information that I had or the documentation that I had. No, he said that he had some friends in Hollywood that were interested in possibly making a film based on my book. That's the extent of the Democratic leadership's concern on this issue. Can Hollywood make a movie about this book? I understand that the theme of this is whose war, and I want to, because Cindy is here, I didn't even know she was going to be here tonight, but I had planned on talking about this anyway. I want to say right now that I think that the person who needs to be targeted in the Congress and forced onto the ropes is the so-called quarterback, Nancy Pelosi. You know, they say that you define a society based on how that society treats the least of its people. And I think that's very, very true, and this country has done a disgraceful job in being there for the least of our people. With politicians, who they are is not defined in times of relative peace. It's defined in the darkest of times, the most violent of times, the most controversial, as they like, of times. And the fact is that we've seen Nancy Pelosi's true colors. We have seen Nancy Pelosi and her plan. It's called Support the Occupation. We have seen Nancy Pelosi act as a vegetarian between meals, and it's time to kick her out of the restaurant. And there's no person better to take on Nancy Pelosi than Cindy Sheehan. Nancy Pelosi goes to Iraq, and you know who protects her? Blackwater mercenaries. Blackwater mercenaries have provided security for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi when she went to Iraq. And there's a deeper connection here between Nancy Pelosi, Blackwater, and Cindy Sheehan, and it's this. Cindy Sheehan's son was killed in Sadr City, Iraq, 5 days after 4 Blackwater mercenaries were ambushed and killed in Fallujah, while the United States was gearing up to slaughter that city. On the morning that Cindy Sheehan's son was killed in Sadr City, Blackwater mercenaries engaged in a prolonged firefight with Shiites who were rising up against the U.S. occupation in Najaf. And that battle, which the Iraqis viewed as a massacre, led to a call from the radical, fiery cleric Muqtada al-Sadr for an uprising across the country, and Casey Sheehan was killed as a direct result of that rebellion in Sadr City. And so we can trace a direct line from the actions and activities of Blackwater to the death of Cindy Sheehan's son that day in Sadr City in Baghdad, Iraq. And the fact of the matter is that there's no one better to stand up and say to Nancy Pelosi, if you support this occupation so much, why aren't your children over there?